Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to day 3 of UK Hydrogen Week here at Brunel University. For those of you who've missed the last 2 episodes, this is the third in a series called Thinking Differently in Hydrogen, hosted by me, Alex Reep, Brunel's Royal Society Entrepreneur in Residence. Each day, we're having a presentation from a Brunel expert on a specific topic, followed by a talk from an SME who are developing technology or supporting the growth in the UK's hydrogen economy. So a few housekeeping tips before we start. Firstly, as you may have noticed when you logged in, these webinars are being recorded. Once the series is finished, they'll be on the Brunel YouTube page. So if that is an issue, then please feel free to leave the webinar. Secondly, we will, after the talk, we will be having a Q&A session. So please do put either your questions in the chat, or at the appropriate time, do raise your hand using the reaction buttons, and I'll endeavour to let you ask your question in person. And finally, please also do keep yourself muted for the talks, and yes, we can have discussion later on. So we've so far had 2 days, first on hydrogen living labs, and yesterday on hydrogen combustion. And today we're looking at how we can grow the UK hydrogen economy with talks around policy and public acceptance. So far the UK government has put a lot of interest in the decarbonisation of the UK through the use of hydrogen, but of course there are still a lot of unanswered questions about how this can be achieved. There are constant consultations going out to try and see how anything from what is considered low carbon hydrogen to what business models can we use. And as that's all well and good to get that part done, but of course the major question is how can we actually sort of demonstrate a use case for the generation of green hydrogen, and then for the actual use of it as an end use. And yesterday we discussed one of those, which was hydrogen combustion and the potential for large vehicle transport using modified versions of internal combustion engines to use hydrogen. And we also had a sort of a Q&A where we talked about vehicle storage systems and how you can do that. But one area we haven't yet actually touched on in the series is sort of demonstrating feasibility of these large-scale projects, and sort of the willingness for the public to have them have large-scale systems basically on their doorstep. Of course, when you mention hydrogen, a lot of people, most of what they've heard about it is the 1937 Hindenburg disaster, which of course is never a good way to start a discussion, and really always means that whenever you're having a conversation, you're always sort of starting on the back foot. And so today we have 2 speakers that are working in this area through a feasibility study who's being published a lot also during UK Hydrogen Week, and we'll hear more about that later. And so first I'd like to introduce Professor Justin Fisher from Brunel University, who is a Professor of Political Science and Director of Brunel Public Policy, whose research focuses on elections, the impact of election campaigns, political regulation and electoral integrity. And together with Dr. Manu Savani, produced a comprehensive synthesis of existing literature on public opinion and the drivers of community acceptance of hydrogen, designed to inform policymakers in this area. So Justin, I will give you the floor.
Great, thank you, Alex. Let me share my screen. And so many thanks. So as Alex said, we conducted some work with Richard and Beta Technology, looking at community acceptance for the introduction of hydrogen projects. And I think it's important to stress at the outset that a key aspect of any policy, whether it's hydrogen or anything else, is how you deliver acceptance and adoption by communities. And it's no use proceeding on the basis of if they build it, they will come. In other words, community acceptance, in order to make the industry flourish, and be used by communities, is absolutely an essential but often overlooked aspect of work on hydrogen. So the question we asked was, what aspects are key in delivering community acceptance of hydrogen technology? So how did we do this? Well, as Alex said, essentially what we wanted to do was deliver a synthesis of existing studies both in the United Kingdom, but also further around the world, looking at what approaches has been taken, what evidence there was in terms of community acceptance. And we looked particularly at academic journals, articles published between 2008 and 2022. And what came out of this was an extremely useful way of thinking about acceptance by communities and other stakeholders. And that's outlined in the figure here, which is from an article published in 2021 by Modi and colleagues. And essentially, this article argues that there are three broad aspects of acceptance, what we call socio-political acceptance, which includes acceptance by public key stakeholders which might include businesses, for example, but also policymakers. Market acceptance, which looks at consumer behavior, the behavior of investors, but also acceptance between firms. And the area that we want to focus on here, which is community acceptance, which focuses on matters around procedural justice, distributional justice, and trust. And I'll explain more about those in a minute. So our two key themes that we wanted to look at to help inform the project we were doing with Beta Technology was what were the key factors relating to knowledge of hydrogen, and what did the literature say about the key drivers of community acceptance of hydrogen. So let's start with public awareness of hydrogen. In general, it's fair to say that there is low public awareness of hydrogen in general, although this has increased over the past decade, and it varies across different technology applications. But we also know from the literature that greater knowledge of hydrogen technology is associated with greater support for its use. So the more people know, the more they're likely to be supportive of its use in a variety of applications. But having said that, low awareness is not necessarily a barrier to acceptance, especially when hydrogen is presented to people as a good solution to energy problems, but also addresses broader environmental concerns. So awareness is low. The more people know about it, the more supportive they are, but you can deliver acceptance if you demonstrate particularly its environmental credentials. So what are the key drivers then of social acceptance of hydrogen? Well, there are a variety of these, and we've broken these down into a series of groups. First and foremost, there are demographic patterns that we can observe. By and large, men are more supportive of hydrogen technology than women. Those from higher socioeconomic areas, those with higher levels of education, and younger people. And in many ways, perhaps with the exception of the gender aspect, that's as we might expect. So broadly speaking, where people have higher levels of education, and particularly amongst younger people where concerns about the environment tend to be more prevalent, these are the kinds of areas where you get higher acceptance. One of the key things that comes out, one of the things that I really want to stress in this presentation, are the local level benefits. And what we find from our research on this is that communities are much more likely to accept hydrogen, whether that's hydrogen use or the installation of hydrogen infrastructure, if the distributive benefits of that are clear. So for example, studies in Asia find that where there have been, where this has delivered increasing employment, increased business opportunities, there is much more acceptance of hydrogen. But it also has particular aspects that businesses and investors need to think about. So the point about jobs is critical, because what the studies show is that you need to avoid what we call fly-in, fly-out workforces. If you have an installation where workers are bussed in from outside, that neither generates increased employment in the community, nor is it likely to improve the wider business environment in the locality. And indeed, so important are the local level benefits in terms of increasing, in particular, economic circumstances, that any macro level or national level acceptance of hydrogen is likely to be undermined if micro level or local level acceptance is low. So when thinking about hydrogen opportunities, it's absolutely essential to engage local communities and convince them of the importance both of the technology, but also for their broader benefits, particularly economic benefits. Thirdly, not surprisingly, we find that environmental attitudes matter, and particularly if hydrogen is seen as being green. So this has particular relevance for the type of hydrogen production that's engaged in. So there is support for hydrogen, but mainly if it's seen as being a green alternative. Infrastructure matters, fourthly. Just as we've seen with electric cars, the technology that's used must be available and convenient to use. So if you're thinking of hydrogen vehicles, for example, all the evidence suggests that people need to be able to use that in as convenient a way as they can do, for example, with petrol-driven cars. So they need both to be able to refuel easily, but also to be able to maintain those vehicles. And what's also clear from the work on infrastructure is that visible security for communities is important. There are concerns, as Alex said, about explosions, but there are also key concerns about the possibility of terrorist attacks or vandalism. So the infrastructure needs to be secure and seen to be secure. And this helps explain, for example, why many studies suggest that people favor the local generation of hydrogen rather than having enormous hubs where hydrogen is transported by road. People seem to object to that, both because of the environmental concerns, but also because they think that large-scale transport would be vulnerable to terrorist attack. Fifthly, visible existing use really helps with the community acceptance of hydrogen. And this can be a relatively straightforward thing to achieve. For example, if local authorities use their fleet vehicles to be driven by hydrogen, or also buses, such that buses are visibly fueled by this source and advertise the fact on the side. So people can see hydrogen in action and also see, as Alex suggested, that we're not about to have another Hindenburg. So brings me to the last 2 points, because what's essential to understand in thinking about community acceptance and therefore delivering good policy is that knowledge of, and particularly beliefs about hydrogen, are entirely subjective. And these beliefs must be addressed even if they are not objectively true. Now, as Alex said, one of the areas of my research is on elections. And one of the key ways in which voters make decisions about elections is based on the economy. But critically, it's about voters' perceptions of the economy rather than the actual state of the economy. And so what governments do and what parties do is try to shift those perceptions. And that indeed is one of the problems that the current government is experiencing in perceptions about its competence. It may objectively be entirely competent, but the difficulty it has is that it's not able to shift people's subjective perceptions. Now, just as governments can't change the electorate if they don't come to the decisions they want, so investors and those working in the area of hydrogen can't change the communities. They have to address their knowledge and beliefs about hydrogen, even if they may be wide of the mark in terms of their accuracy. So as a consequence, this brings us to the final two areas that help drive social acceptance. First, trust. It's essential that local communities trust the motivations and the competence of local authorities, of the industry and firms that are involved in hydrogen production, but also more broadly, the ideas of science and technology. If a company or a local authority lacks trust amongst its community, it's going to have a much more difficult job to convince people that this is a safe and also profitable means of energy production. And to that end, credible knowledge brokers and endorsements can really help generate community trust. Now, who might those be? Well, not surprisingly, those may include universities. Generally speaking, universities are trusted by local communities as credible knowledge brokers. But it can also involve trusted forms of media at both national and local levels. But also, the evidence suggests that this can come from celebrities or respected public figures. Now, that's not any old celebrity, but if you have a respected public figure who commands the trust of communities, that is the sort of thing which all the evidence suggests can help deliver social acceptance. So really, just to sum up, one of the things that's often missing from policy discussions is the idea of the acceptance either of the development of infrastructure or of the adoption of the technology. But it shouldn't be like that. It needs to be front and center. And if you overlook local communities and community acceptance, you are far less likely to be successful. And on that point, I shall hand back to Alex.
Thanks very much, Justin. And yeah, as you said, I think it's been very interesting going around and talking to parliamentarians through what I'm doing with this, and sort of hearing that yeah, one of the things that they actually really enjoy talking to is people from universities, because every time they get spoken to by someone from industry, they're imagining that it's they're lobbying for a certain technology or a certain aspect, whereas coming from the university, we're seen a lot more as an independent sort of force rather than someone that might be just trying to get their own agenda, which I sort of found is a very interesting way of sort of yeah, talking to those sort of people. So thank you very much. And sort of next we have Richard Wrigley from who's managing director and co-owner of Beta Technology. Richard has interfaced with the commercial, academic and public sectors for over 35 years and has worked in the areas of new product development, innovation and program management. So Richard, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to Justin for the introduction of the policy side. So I'll just share my screen. So hopefully that's come up now.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you to Justin and his colleague Manu for the work that they did in support of this feasibility study in Doncaster. So we did a feasibility study during the middle part of last year, and that was reported to Doncaster Council. So if I just move through, hopefully. So the feasibility study, and it's part of the funding, was under the UK government's UK Community Renewal Fund through the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority and Doncaster Council and Business Doncaster. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but I have to go through that. And we were very ably supported by Brunel University as part of it, Cenex, which is the Low Carbon and Fuel Cell Centre, and Market Infra, which is a consultancy based in Sheffield. Beta Technology is based in Doncaster and has been since 1999. So we've done a fair amount of work in the area. So the project overview, what was it about? Really, it was stemmed from the need to start looking, or to be looking at, the reduction of the impact of heavy lorry movements. For those that don't know Doncaster, I'll perhaps describe it a little bit later. It's a very big logistics hub, if you like, a centre, with both rail and road networks, and a number of large distribution companies involved, and a number of warehouse sites. So it sits on the kind of A1, M18, M62 sort of area. So it was really to look at how we can decarbonise. There are a number of technologies potentially around, and hydrogen was one that we would look at. If we're going to do that, what's the infrastructure that's required? So the project was to look at how do you create a refueling station, and where would you put it? Where would be the best location to get it going? And one of the other areas that was stipulated was that we should ideally look for green energy, renewable energy, which would support the electrolyzers. It's shown here as solar. Around Doncaster, there's quite a number of solar farms going up or available. So that was why that particular one was focused on. As I said, we were looking at HGVs, particularly the 44 tons, so the top end, but also other potential users that could be early adopters, like refuse collection vehicles, buses and stackers, etc. Going across the bottom, as Justin has indicated, we wanted to understand, you know, the social impact of it. How would this be viewed? Because a number of existing developments are generally, not exclusively, generally associated with perhaps more industrial sites. And it could be that the location that this came up with is more urban. So that was to understand that side of it, so social. Justin also said, you know, about the economic impact. So it'd be great to see if we could get supply chain benefit in kind of Doncaster, South Yorkshire. And within Doncaster, there's an electrolyser manufacturer, CPH2. And so it'd be good to involve them. And just along the road is ITM Power as well at Sheffield. Skills development is key to getting new technology in and working and efficient. So again, how can that link into into Doncaster College, into the University Technical College that's in Doncaster, and the university links to Sheffield and Birmingham that exist as well. What are the technologies that would come along to support from an infrastructure and delivery, and how would the logistics companies interface with that? So those are all the different kind of areas that we were looking at. Just very quickly, an example of how the hydrogen generation works. So you've got water supply coming in, green electricity. You're then feeding that into the electrolyzer, compressing that hydrogen and storing that, and then dispensing it. And from the electrolyzer, you can also potentially have waste products. So you would have heat and medical grade oxygen. So heat could be used for a local buildings. The oxygen, interestingly enough, it says medical grade, but we could use it for sewage treatment. Apparently, it enhances the treatment by about 25%. So it's a good side benefit if you happen to have that close by. And then not just having the kind of hydrogen generation hub, you could have satellite refueling points, which may be at a bus depot or something like that. So not having to replicate hydrogen generation everywhere, because the space may not be available to achieve that. So why Doncaster? Why were we looking at it? As I've said, you've got very strong road and rail networks focused on freight, movement of freight. And if you've got freight coming up on rail, so for example, to the inland port, there's iPort Rail in Doncaster. So that's taking containers off road onto rail, but then you put them back onto the road for further on delivery. So is there a way of trying to decarbonise that? There are large fleet operators and logistics companies in the area. And as I mentioned, there are solar farm schemes being developed in planning, and some have since got planning permission to do that. Talked about the skills. We have in Doncaster the National Centre for Advanced Transport and Infrastructure, and that's linked to Birmingham University. And then you've got the University of Sheffield Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, which is looking at having a potential site in and around Doncaster. 2 electrolyser companies I've already mentioned. And in the East Coast Hydrogen is generating blue hydrogen, so that's from other processes, with the potential that there may be a pipeline to move that around the country, coming in close proximity to Doncaster. So that could be a different source of hydrogen. Obviously, Doncaster has got a strong heritage in engineering, particularly through the railway and mining sectors. And then, you know, is there the opportunity to start to attract to the developing industrial and research areas around Doncaster, people like OEM vehicle manufacturers and support. And also investor interest. So throughout our activity, we're gaining some investor interest. In recent weeks, the investor interest has increased. So the private sector coming into fund rather than relying on public sector is of interest. So there's Doncaster in the middle. You've got the Tees Valley activity to the north. You've got Midlands Engine Hydrogen Technologies value, and that's looking more at some of the vehicle developments. You've got Northwest and HyNet, and then you've got, as I mentioned, the Humber Zero to the east. So Doncaster provides quite a good stepping point to make sure there's ongoing refueling available. So part of the roadmap we were looking at, so where did we want to get to? As I said, we wanted kind of green electricity as the core production to be there. And as I said, we focused on solar panels, and that's feeding into your hydrogen generation. And what we wanted to do was try and achieve something which was at scale, something that looked, if you like, a bit more like a normal refueling station or hub, compared with perhaps a more industrial unit. But very importantly, we focused on the demand side. So we've got to have the demand in order to get the investment for the infrastructure. And so who are going to be the early users, the early adopters? So we got quite good engagement from private sector fleets, from private owner fleets, rather than from corporate fleets. And they were showing interest, but we're raising issues such as availability of vehicles and prices of vehicles, and when the infrastructure is going to be in place. They don't just necessarily travel around Doncaster or Doncaster to Newcastle. They go a lot further afield. So how's the infrastructure going to support that? But not just HGV, was refuse collection vehicles, so through the local authorities, and buses as a possibility. Stackers, I mentioned Airport Rail, they have a fleet of diesel stackers for moving the containers around. Is there an opportunity there to move from diesel to hydrogen, which gives them more flexibility than, say, electric power? So the project impacts, really, we were looking at inward investment opportunities. And as I say, we've had quite a lot of interest from investors. We're now kind of moving to the phase where this report was published this week on Monday. The council allowed the top level report to be published. So that's available on the Business Doncaster website and Beta's website. And moving towards the business case and crystallizing the demand side. So having conversations with demand and them saying, yeah, we would be interested, we need to see how this is going to work, needs to crystallize into actual commitments, because that's what will help investors and infrastructure to be implemented. But also then to look at the economic impact on the borough. So how do the skills flow into this? How does the supply chain flow into this? So how we gain better benefit and longer term impacts for the region. So those are how it's going to progress. So at the moment, Doncaster has a strong sustainability agenda. I talked about the decarbonising of HGVs, for example, as part of the move away from fossil fuels, but also within Doncaster and its surrounding areas, because of the major road networks, it has an air pollution issue. So one of the policy drivers from the council will be around air quality and helping to reduce some of the air quality issues generated by HGV and other vehicles. So this is a very simplistic roadmap. We are moving into kind of the business case, or a little bit behind where we hoped, and trying to secure investment and find investment to take the project further. And with the aim of hopefully in kind of around 2025 of having some form of a refueling hub and early users in place, and hopefully attracting other hydrogen related businesses, be they maintenance, supply chain of parts or vehicles, into the area. And this is just a vision, an example that was generated as part of the project. My thanks to Bon Bryan, who developed this image. And really, it was just showing it's not just hydrogen and hydrogen generation, but you've got multi-fuel. So you've got electric. We may include LPG as well into these. And within the bigger building, it's trying to illustrate things like skills development, but also how you engage the wider community by illustrating how these technologies work. So that was just an illustration. I'm sure the reality will be better than that. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Richard.